Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parasha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation, Anshe Amen. And joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanowski, Anshe Chesed, New York City, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island. We're recording this as day 74, 75 of the war, praying for the Chatufim, the Chatufot, that they are returned home, the hostages, praying for all of our friends, our dear ones and loved ones who are in Gaza, praying for the people that the families, etc. We're thinking of them and constantly thinking about our study in on the split screen. We're also thinking of many of the people that watch us and are devoted to us. We thank you. Thank you for always turning to Parsha Talk to learn a little bit, to explore, maybe discover things. A couple of shout outs, Rabbi Kalmanowski.
I was so happy that Kate Uziel told me how much you like the show. So my participation is dedicated to Kate Uziel and Ori and Liam and Cora Ann and Ventura.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you for watching and please share your thoughts right on Barry's Facebook page. And we'll like it. Anyway, this week, Parshat Vayigash. It would be remiss if I didn't say this was an amazing Parsha, because it actually is an amazing Parsha. It's amazing because it has this tremendous emotion to it, the tension that's going to be resolved. Why don't we start out with the first scene in the Parsha? And you know, we have been talking about the development of the characters. Here, Judah is making this, it's one of the longest speeches in the entire Torah. And he's really laying it out before Joseph. He doesn't know that it's Joseph that he's talking to. But when he talks about Benjamin, who is being now a hostage, he's like, Joseph is threatening to keep him there forever as a slave. Because last week Benjamin was framed. So Judah now making every plea, and he's focusing on his father. Why don't we pick it up from chapter 44, verse 20. Vayomer el Adoni, we Vanomer el Adoni, sorry, we said to my master, Yesh lanu av zaken, we have an old father, Yeled Kunim Katan, and he has a son of his old age, a little son. Ve'achiv met, his brother is dead. Vayivater hu levado li'imo ve'aviv aivo, and he alone remains of his mother, and his father loves him. It's such a compressed verse and powerful verse. Barry, we were talking about it just before, and how the family experience of loss, and all families kind of map their own experiences onto this, or have this family map itself onto their own families. And I just reflect. I don't know. Go anywhere with that.
So I just want to point something out before I make my comment on the verse, is that in a couple of chapters, we're going to discover that Binyamin the Katan has 10 sons.
Yeah, okay.
Which is more sons than any of his brothers.
With funny names.
Well, that's another story altogether. But this idea of Binyamin the Katan needs to be unraveled a little bit, because it's not even clear that the Torah knows what it's talking about here. But be that as it may, I think what we have here is an indication of a transformation in the brothers. And one of the, we have this phrase that we like to quote, Maseh Avot Siman Lovanim, that what happens to the ancestors is a sign for what happened to their descendants, their children. And, in short, what it means is that the characters in Breshit are characters or individuals, but they also stand for much of what is going to unfold later in the Tanakh, but also we like to believe in our subsequent history as a people. And so there's this transformation in Judah that, explaining the plight of his father, he understands that his father's love for a son that is not himself need not be destructive, because the last indication that Jacob loved a child was Yosef, and consequently he gave him the Katon Nepasim, the coat of many colors, and that set in motion the tragedy of the previous week's Parsha, or 2 weeks ago. And now we see that he's basing his appeal to this second in command to Pharaoh on him understanding how important a father's love is. And it's, of course, for us wonderfully ironic, because it has to resonate with Joseph that his father also loved Joseph.
So where I have trouble in this verse is the notion how they present their father. He starts out by saying Yesh lanu av zaken. We have an old father. And then there's a subtle shift, which is Aviv Ahivo, his father loves him. Now you can get by with that, right? The reference to Jacob as his father, as opposed to our father. There are lots of ways he could have said this. One of the other ways he could have said is, we have an old father, and he has a young son, and he had another brother. His brother's dead, but our father loves him. Our father loves him. But he doesn't say our. He says his father loves him, and I sense in that the tension. The tension is, whose father is it? And this is going to be something that's going to play itself out later on in the story, because when Joseph reveals himself, he says, Ha'od Avichai. I am Ani Yosef. I'm sorry if I made the spoiler here. He can't hold himself back from telling who he is. This is Ani Yosef Ha'od Avichai, is my father, Chai, as opposed to saying Ha'od Avinu Chai. I'm just wondering if you're bothered by the same thing here.
But explain why it bothers you, because you said, I forget if you said this while we were preparing, or you said it since we started recording, that the brothers have attained I mean, Barry said this also, the brothers have attained a kind of maturity to be able to deal with that thing that drove them so crazy before. It made them terrible before, that they knew that they were unloved. They knew, yeah, we don't know if they were unloved. We know they were less loved. And it certainly, galled Leah that she was snua, that she was less loved or even hated. And it's possible, I'm kind of inclined to read this in Judah's great self-sacrifice on behalf of his father, his great self-sacrifice on behalf of Binyamin. Like, as Judah tells this story, it says, let me tell you, my father, he said, my wife had 2 children. Actually, what does that say? What does that cost Yehuda to say that my wife, referring to his stepmother,
Right.
Or his aunt and stepmother, is, quote, my wife and not my mom. So my mom has been demoted, and yet he can tell that story and not want to hate Binyamin and not want to hate Jacob. And so I feel that part of the grandeur of this passage is Judah's emotional generosity.
So there is transition in Judah, and I think there is a nobility in Judah, and I would make the case that the Torah is very interested in making Judah the noble character. Certainly after having had his little problem with his own sons, Onan and Shelah, and his problem with the wife Tamar. But also, we've been reading the stories now. It's our 3rd week reading the story, and we are recalling that Judah was instrumental in the damage that was done to Joseph. Judah was the one who said, what do we get by killing him? Let's sell him. Let's sell.
I think we can make a profit here.
Let's sell him,
Oh,
right? And it's his
I think
idea.
that even there's an element of nobility in Judah. And we have to compare him to Ruvain both there and then the subsequent scene where Ruvain plays a part. So Ruvain thinks he's going to come back later and save Yosef because he thinks his brothers are going to kill him and he's going to be the hero. And then when he comes back, they sold them. And I think we can all agree that selling a person into slavery
It's killing
is
them.
not a fate worse than death. It is, in fact, it
Equal.
can be an avenue to redemption, which is the story of the Torah. But the other thing is to remember what happens when they're back home and they're trying to figure out how they're going to convince Yaakov to let Binyamin come with them to Egypt. And Ruvain, one of the mind-boggling suggestions
This is the dumbest thing in the whole
is,
Torah.
I'll kill two of my sons in his place.
He says this. I think he says it to Jacob. You can kill two of my sons. You can kill your grandchildren. Is it a deal?
And what does Judah say? Judah says he will be the surety. And I think what's important to recognize is that up until the very end of the story, this is a story that is permeated with loss. Everyone loses someone. And the story, in one sense, is how they navigate that loss. So Judah, by pledging himself as surety, if it goes awry, Joseph will lose Benjamin and Judah. Judah will lose his father and his extended family. But we have to judge it about what the other possible outcomes are. And the other possible outcomes are worse. They'll starve to death in Canaan, or something else will befall them. So the best that we could get here is some scenario of loss. And Judah's has an element of magnanimity because he is willing to withdraw himself from the family, which up until now he's been totally identified with, except for his little excursion to Bathshua. But that's, I think, a noble sacrifice. It certainly makes much more sense than Reuven's sacrifice.
Sure.
I agree with this. I agree with this very much. And I think that there's multiple layers on which, so Judah comes, it is a story of loss. Judah comes, however, as the force of life. It is interesting, the commentators, many of the commentators suggest that when Abraham fled to Egypt after that first famine, that was like an act of faithlessness, and he should have trusted God, and he should have stayed in Canaan and not subjected Sarah to being taken by Pharaoh. I don't really think, maybe there's something to that, but I don't think that the Bible in any way is criticizing the decision to go to Egypt for food. That would be crazy. It would not make good narrative sense or ethical sense for the Bible to be saying, when you are in Eretz Yisrael and there is famine, just lift your eyes to heaven and me'ayin yavo Ezri, and I'll take care of it for you. No, you have to say human action is prized in the Hebrew Bible, and I think that that's true here too. They are shown to be, smart and thoughtful and resourceful. By the way, I want to just note one other thing. I don't think we mentioned this last week. When they first come down, they are consistently referred to as Achei Yosef, and then they become later called, like the Bible will then switch and call them, I think Anashim for the most part. But Achei Yosef is how they are described when they come down for food, which is just such a narratively rich detail. But I want to make another observation about the role of Judah and the Vayigash Elav Yehuda, that Judah comes near to him. So Nachmanides, my favorite commentator, the Ramban, who is, among other of the famous things about the Ramban, is that in the 13th century, he's the first writer whose Kabbalistic allusions in his Torah commentary plays a huge role in popularizing Kabbalah. It's quite ironic because he repeatedly says, I can't tell you anything about this. This is secret lore. And in point of fact, his allusions are incredibly hard to decipher. And he's really, revealing one tefach and covering three more, but he effectively tells you that there is a Kabbalistic dimension. And he says, one of his phrases with respect to Kabbalah is, Hakatuv yagid betachtonim v'yirmoz be'elyonim. The Bible refers to earthly things, but alludes to supernal metaphysical things. So I'm not going to talk about Kabbalah here, but I am going to say that I think that it is true that there are multiple levels on which the story is told. So this story is told about the one brother who draws near to the other brother. And the Bible's basic way of talking about the northern tribes and the southern tribes is that the southern tribes are Judah, and the northern tribes are Ephraim, or Joseph's descendants. In the Haftarah for this week, Ezekiel does this little bit of sympathetic magic and has two blocks of wood. On one is written Eitz Yehuda, and on one is written Eitz Yosef, and draws them together so that they will be one again. And it's this metaphor or poetic rendering for the divisions of Am Yisrael to be overcome when Judah and Joseph get near again. So I have to say that I think that the brilliant maneuver of "and Judah drew near to him," it's about this story, and it's about that other story in which the Judeans and the Ephraimites are a divided, compromised people who long to be reconciled, and that too is being acted out here.
So then we do have the first reconciliation where Joseph does reveal himself. It's just so powerful, the scene. V'lo yachol Yosef litapek. He couldn't hold himself back. L'chol hanitzavim alav, to all the people that are standing. I'm reading chapter 45:1. Vayikra, he says, Otzi kol ish me'alai, get everybody out of here. V'lo amad ish ito bit vada Yosef elachav. So nobody stood between him and his brothers as he revealed himself to his brothers. Vayiten et kolo bivchi, he sends up his voice in wailing. Vayishma'u Mitzrayim, the Egyptians hear, Vayishma Bet Paro, and the whole household of Pharaoh. It's so, it's cinematography, the cinematography of the scene.
Well, you have to finish sketching the scene. So when he lifts his voice in crying or wailing, as you describe it, how is it heard by Beit Paro?
Good question, right? I love it. I taught this scene this week, and I have the imagination that they're standing at the door and they're hearing. It's literally a leak. In the cabinet room, someone's got her. So I watch Israeli news. They always play a leaked recording of a cabinet meeting. It's like who would be that? You can carry anything into a room. There are recorders that are you don't have to remember Get Smart. So you can record on a thumbnail, right? And people walk out.
Everybody's got a phone.
Everybody's got a phone, but say, I'm surprised in a cabinet meeting they don't say, put your phones down. Everybody turn off your phone.
Because everyone has two.
The point is, somebody heard it. They were standing. The narrator heard it. Okay.
But that's actually the cinematography about this, which like you said, if you were telling, I don't know why this is the movie that came into my mind, but in Broadway, Danny Rose, Woody Allen, confesses to Mia Farrow that he loves her all along. And we just see them talking, but we're watching from across the street. And that there's an intimate and loving conversation that goes on, that they get back together, but we don't hear it. Yeah. We just see that it took place. So all of Egypt, Joseph says, privacy, I need some time, everybody get out. And then they hear wailing. Many years ago when I was young, this was when I was in college, actually, when I was before I went to rabbinical school, I wanted to be a newspaper writer. And in the summer of 1986, I was in Nashville, Tennessee. It was an internship. It was way cool. I got to do a lot of fun stuff. And one thing I always remember is there was a horrific death of a child. And I was outside the room when the doctors told her family that the child died. And the wailing was I can still hear it. It's unforgettable.
So it's interesting, though, that the wailing, of course, is a sound without words. Yeah. And then after this wailing, Joseph says, I am your brother, or I am Yosef. Is my father still alive? And they don't answer him.
So there's silence.
They're too stunned. Well, actually, it says Nipalu. They're like visibly shaken, I think, is the way we're supposed to understand it. Not clear again whether it's positive or negative valence to this word Nipalu. And then he goes on to talk some more. And so the two most dramatic parts of this scene are expressive without words. It's the wailing and then the unanswered question.
Yes. The unanswered question, the silence, their silence. The brothers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ora Vichai. Ora Vichai. You said before that like Shlomo Carlebach turned into a song, Ora Vinu Chai,
Yes.
He read the Bible pretty well.
And yet it's unless it comes later in the story as Od Avinu Chai, but it says Ha'od Avi Chai is my father alive, and the my versus our, the first person, the singular first person versus the plural first person, is pretty interesting.
Well, isn't there? I mean, we're going to advance to next week's parsha where Yaakov dies, but it doesn't say Vayama. It says Vayigva Vayos Vayasef El Amav. It never uses the verb met with Yaakov, and Rashi comments there Yaakov lo met, and I think that's where Carlebach got Od Avinu Chai. But even here, it's Od Avinu Chai. It's a good hook for that. Well, let's then go to the next shocking moment in the story when the brothers tell Jacob that he's still alive, and that's chapter 45, verse 26. Vayagidu lo lemor. They tell him, Od Yosef Chai, v'chi hu moshel b'chol eretz Mitzrayim, and that he is the ruler over all of Egypt.
By the way, I got two things to tell you. First of all, he's alive. Second of all, he's the king.
Vayafog libo ki lo hemin lahem. And so that word vayafog libo, it means his heart stopped. And there is this phenomenon of a kind of cardiac arrest when you are shocked, and I once asked a cardiologist this, is that possible? And they said, yeah, it's possible. You can get shocking news and have a kind of, there's a cardiological term for this, not cardiac arrest, but it's a different kind of, anyway.
I think it's cardiac detention. It's not
Whatever it is.
Administrative detention without charge. By the way, our listeners might be interested to know that when we talk about a ceasefire, it's hafsakat esh. When we talk about a pause, it's a hafuga.
Fuga, right?
Which is this word, which is so his heart, like as you were saying, his heart just stopped.
Just pause, right?
Skip the beat.
Right.
Skip the beat.
So what do you make of the next four words? Tilo ha'amin lahem.
Yeah, he didn't believe them.
Well, is it he didn't believe them or he didn't trust it? So,
Well, he couldn't believe it. Maybe it's just
you have this confusion often between belief and trust. And if we say he didn't believe them, then what does that mean? That he thought they were lying?
Yeah.
Or if he didn't trust them, is he wanted it to be true, but he couldn't process it?
Well, why couldn't you just say, in a more colloquial vein, he couldn't believe it? Like, I can't believe that.
Because I think the reason
and by the way, and I'm going to stick with that for a second by saying, the next sentence, and they tell him the whole story, and he sees all the wealth.
Wagons, right? Tagalot.
Vatechi ruach Yaakov avihem, and his spirit came back. His spirit comes back to life. He's revived.
He's revived. So
revived.
This is a death experience he has. He has I guess, a near death or a miniature death experience.
Anyway, not to quibble, but the point I would make, Jeremy, is that I think we often don't pay careful enough attention to what is said in dialogue or in speech and what is said in narration. And the reason I think that we can't say I don't believe it is because it's a narration. It's not a.
Okay, that's fair, but I think I could turn it into a third person thing and say he just couldn't process this totally unprocessable information
Oh, well.
he went into shock. I mean, just yesterday, by the way, I was at a shiva house for somebody who lost his mother. She was 92. She was Israeli from the old days. I've been in the United States a long time, but that woman, the 92-year-old woman, had lost her son some years ago, who was in his 50s at that time. And my member related that when he had to tell his mother that, her other son had died, she like freaked out and and kind of flailed about and then immediately passed out. And you can totally see how
This is the experience
something
that so many families are going through in
yeah.
Israel.
Okay.
They say "Habsorah hamara mikol," the piece of news that is more bitter than all. And the novelist
Debbie
has
Grossman.
Debbie Grossman, Isha, what is it? Rasami Bsorah, right? The name of his novel. It's a novel based on the whole idea that she doesn't want to hear the news, the piece of information, the knock on the
Well, it's
door.
not that she doesn't want to hear the news, that if she doesn't hear the news, it can't be true.
Uh-huh. Okay. So therefore, again, what are we doing with information here? And he receives the information. It's always very, interesting to note that the brothers are not super sensitive. They don't say, sit down. They don't say, we have something to tell you. Although in the we in the play, it's father, we have something to tell you, but that's when he's dead, right? But here he's saying to him he's alive, and they don't prepare him. And
So, and then the continuation verse also is a little bit puzzling. It concludes, Elcha ve'erenu b'terem amut. So I think I'll go down to Egypt and see him before I die. So Jacob is kind of obsessed with death.
yes,
Can't quite get beyond it. And maybe that's what's going to give the punch to the later comment when he meets Pharaoh and says, I'm not going to live as long as my father or grandfather.
all right. So we have a couple of minutes left. So let's do the very next scene where God speaks to Jacob at night and says, Yaakov, Yaakov is chapter 46, verse 2. And he says, Hineni, and here I am. God says, Anochi el Elohei avicha, I am the God of your father. Al tira merda Mitzrayim, don't be afraid of going down to Egypt. Ki legoy gadol asim chasham, I will make you a great nation there. Anochi ered imcha, I will go down with you to Egypt, Mitzrayim. Va'anochi a'alcha gamalo, I will go up with you, yes. V'Yosef yashit yado aleinecha, and Joseph will place his hands on your eyes. And we are troubled by that phrase in some way because it's kind of euphemistic, and I think most commentators do say that this is a reference for his death, and it would follow what you're saying, Barry, which is that this is just an affirmation of what Jacob has always been thinking. Like,
Don't worry, Jacob, you're going to die.
you're gonna die. You're gonna die in Egypt, and
Which,
that's
by the
that.
way, you are.
But I think
yeah,
this is why it's important that God identifies himself as the God of Isaac, because that God told Isaac, you can't leave the land. And now he's giving permission to Jacob to leave the land. And the reason why it's important is because we might leave with the sense that there's a great deal of self-interest in what Jacob is doing. He's going to see his son, but in fact, it's part of the destiny of the people unfolding as well.
right. But it's still a question as to when they're going to come up and how they're going to come up. And I will make you a great nation, but he doesn't disclose to Jacob that your children, that great nation, is going to be enslaved there. And
Well, this is like what I said about the typological reading of the Maaseh Avot Siman Lebanim, the typological reading that stories about the ancestors are to be read on multiple dimensions, including as major symbolic statements about the descendants. And so we know, because we've already, it's impossible that any Jew who's inherited the Torah already knows the Torah. So it's not the first time you ever read it. If you could ever be that person who discovers it for the first time, but it's not true for any of us. By the time we read it, we already know what's happening. And Jacob and Joseph both are symbolics. The symbolic import is we go into exile, we come out stronger. I will make you a great nation there. We are going to hear the Arami Oved Avi passage from Deuteronomy that is used in the Haggadah. We know that this journey is going to be extremely difficult. It will include oppression, it will include slavery, and it will include redemption. And so when God says that, don't be afraid to go down to Egypt. We'll put aside the fact that Isaac was a different case, but I think any Jew hears, or I think the Bible intends that any Jew will hear this and say, don't be afraid to go down to Egypt. This is our fate, but we're coming back out.
So there also seems to be a disconnect here that we might address for a moment. And that is, Abraham has already been told that his descendants will be slaves for 400 years. Does he just keep that little tidbit to himself? Or does that become part of the family lore? And that we would think he might pass on to Isaac and Jacob. Or, do we really see Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as three almost lonely individuals?
Independent and discreet, yes.
I just want to leave with one thought, and that is one of the things that kind of puzzled me this week, thinking about the Torah reading, is when do we think a story like this actually became part of the national lore? Right? I mean, we can understand that as this is unfolding, there's no one recording it. My apologies to more traditional minded people. So when does a story like this actually become part of the national fabric of Jacob and Joseph?
Why? And so
yeah, it's very curious.
Our best guess is that it's during the monarchy, during the Davidic, and that they're accessing a mythic past here as they tell these stories. And these stories, there is oral lore that's coming down, and it's being written and being, sculpted and perfected over time and put together. And the story has to relate to their own understanding of their family. I think, as far as Breshit is concerned, and here this is probably the point, which is the brothers, we mentioned at the beginning, the brothers reconcile. Breshit is working that problem throughout, from Cain and Hevel on. And finally, by the end of Breshit, we do get the sense that, within a family, brothers, siblings can get along. And that's going to be crucial for the life of the people. It's crucial for the life of our people today. One of the things that we are living through is the whole tension of achidut versus achdut. Are we all our own little islands, or can we be one nation? So here we are, in a moment of goral, fateful moment of a people, and we are demonstrating, of course, some, certainly quite a lot of achdut. But, if you just kind of closed your eyes and blinked back, 3 months ago, we were very un-achdut
Yeah.
And so, the hope that Breshit gives us at the end is that these brothers come together, that it is portraying a family that, with all its fractiousness, can come together, and that's quite hopeful, I think.
That's a good way to call it.
That's it. Well, we have other things. There are lots of other things in this amazing parsha, but we've come to the conclusion of our time together, and we're only going to be left with one more parsha in Breshit. Always difficult to get to the end, but sweet to know that we have people watching and listening, and we thank them, and we hope that this gives us a lot to think about during these very challenging days for Am Yisrael. We pray for Am Yisrael. We pray for the Chatufim, the Chatufot, and we pray for everyone that there's strength to endure difficult weeks that we've had, and course, challenging weeks ahead. With that, we want to hope that Shabbat for everyone is a quiet Shabbat, a Shabbat of comfort, and a Shabbat of Shalom. So, Shabbat Shalom. See you
Shabbat
next
shalom.
on the next edition of Parsha Talk. Bye-bye.